A small puppy, screaming and shaking, went out onto the deserted street as the police was wrapping up his duty. It wasn't the glittering, odd collar around the pup's neck was what froze him, not the tears or the desperation in its eyes. What he found next left him speechless, as the early morning golden glow filled the peaceful streets of Maplewood. After completing an exhausting night shift, Son Officer Nathan Harper was eager to get home. Been a quiet night, the kind he liked, with no interruptions or emergencies. As he parked his cruiser in the station parking lot, he heard only the quiet hum of a small-town routine. Nathan blinked as a little person ran across the road, teetering on tiny legs, out of the corner of his eye. A puppy, just a few months old, was rushing frantically with its little screams as he adjusted his sight to the source of the action. Nathan hurriedly got out of his car, reflexively ducking to the side as he cut through the morning stillness. "Hey there, little one," he whispered gently so as not to frighten anyone. The puppy, a shambling creature with a golden coat and floppy ears, halted a few feet away, breathing heavily as though it had ran a considerable distance, and its large, tear-filled eyes met. Nathan's heart tightened with desperation. "Where did you come from, buddy?" Nathan whispered, stretching a. The puppet paused for a moment before scurrying forward and pushing its small body on his calf as though. Nathan carefully picked it up, feeling how cold, in an attempt to find solace and shelter, and delicate it felt in his arms, which is how he initially noticed the collar. At first glance, it appeared to be just a leather band with a glittering tag hanging from it. But as, with his breath caught in his throat, Nathan turned it over to read the message. The tag was not inscribed within. Instead of an address or phone number, it featured a single, mysterious word in beautiful script. Nathan felt sick to his stomach. What did this mean, and who would post such a message? On a collar, but more significantly, where did the cop get this puppy? Looked around, keeping his intuition sharp. The street was empty, and there were no indications of anyone in the area who might. Nathan felt a burst of resolve when the dog, whom he had been searching for, let out another gentle whine. This was a call for assistance, not just a wandering canine, and he was going to locate. Find out why Nathan brought the small, scared puppy into the police station. Body crushed tightly against his chest, the building's worn brick front highlighted by the morning sun, and as he entered, he was welcomed by the familiar smell of coffee and paperwork. Officer Jenny Carter, Nathan's partner, was at her. She was drinking from a warm mug at her desk when she looked up, perplexed, to see the puppy in his arms. Establishing a rescue facility, but when she saw the worry on Harper's face, she softened her tone and taunted him. Nathan said, setting the puppy on the desk, as the man ran out to me in tears. Whined, curled into a tight ball, and was still clearly terrified. But notice how he gave the collar. To Jenny, who read the inscription and arched an eyebrow. Help Jenny's. She claimed that her brow furrowing is unique because her jovial personality abruptly evaporated. Nathan shook his head, showing no signs, no ID, and no microchip. Are you certain he hasn't simply vanished? He went up to me as if he knew I could help, and Jenny reached out to pet the puppy in case somebody was looking for him, who leaned into her touch after flinching a little. Poor thing, she muttered. Fearful, Nathan took a seat at his desk and placed the collar next to him. I'm going to review local news of missing dogs, break-ins, and anything strange that might. Made a note on the collar for a purpose, and as Nathan searched the database, Jenny set out a little bowl of. You believe this has something to do with the dog being enticed to eat by water and some leftover chicken from her lunch. Larger, she said, I don't know. To which Nathan's gaze scanned the screen, but as the minutes went by, Nathan's search turned up nothing, and there were no reports of lost dogs that fit the puppy's description, and there were no local occurrences that appeared to be connected to frustration. Nevertheless, he chose to broaden his search area just before giving up, and Jenny said, Hey, look at this, she remarked, displaying the collar, which she had turned inside out to reveal a little, virtually undetectable stitching on the inside, which was a sequence of letters rather than merely a decorative design. Nathan remarked, leaning closer, Where are those numbers that are meticulously embroidered into the leather? They appear to be coordinates. Jenny confirmed that she had entered the numbers into a mapping program by grabbing her phone. Her eyes widened when the location appeared, It's roughly 15 miles away from here, in an old cottage close to Pinewood Forest. Nathan scowled. It's a far-off place with few. Jenny nodded. Do you think the person who left this note wanted someone? People go out there, especially at this time of year. Nathan looked at the Pui, who had finally calmed down enough to take a few bites of chicken to locate the cabin. I don't think we can overlook this, though, because an hour later Nathan and Jenny were traveling down a convoluted dirt road that led to Jenny's dog, whom she now calls Scout, sat on her lap as they headed for Pinewood Forest. The path narrowed as they went, occasionally releasing a gentle whine as though they could sense the significance of their journey. Upon approaching the coordinates, the path was obscured by long shadows cast by towering pine trees. When they finally got there, they saw a decrepit cabin that appeared abandoned, with a drooping roof and boarded-up windows. However, a broken branch close to the entrance, tire marks in the ground, and a few other small indications of recent activity. Nathan parked the car, turned to Jenny, and said, "Stay with Scout. I'll check it." There was a faint illumination coming from one of the windows. Jenny began to object, but she changed her mind when she noticed the resolve in his eyes. "Be careful," she added, referring to Nathan. With his hand on the holster of his service weapon, he slowly made his way to the cabin and tapped on the door, but there was no answer, and the dim light within flickered, possibly from candle or flashlight. Nathan opened the door and entered, his eyes adjusting to the interior was simple, with an old table, a few seats, and a stack of blankets in the corner. But it was a tiny wooden box on the table that drew his eye because it was beautifully crafted with. A freshly broken book was found within the box along with other pictures, each of which featured a different dog. Appeared to be strays, while some had Scout-style collars. Beneath the pictures was a scribbled letter that addressed Nathan's mind is being protected as they watch, sending a shiver down his spine. He snatched up the crate and asked, "Who are these dogs and what do they have in common?" and went back to the car where Jenny was nervously waiting. "What did you discover there?" requested Nathan to put the box with the pictures and the note on the dashboard. "These canines have been documented by someone. They are part of something greater." Scout let out a piercing bark that startled them both. The puppy's small body trembled once, and his large eyes were riveted on the woods. Jenny followed his eyes once more. "Do you believe there are more out there?" Nathan firmly grasped the steering wheel. There was only one way to know Nathan was a driver. Carefully followed the small dirt trail that seemed to vanish into the trees as it ran along the border of Pinewood Forest. Jenny sat next to him since he had more questions than answers after finding the box and the mysterious note. Keeping Scout close while the puppy kept whimpering and his eyes darted to the shadows outside the window, Jenny broke the uneasy silence by saying, "This isn't just about stray dogs. Someone went to such lengths to leave that collar and those coordinates. But why hasn't Nathan responded to us yet?" His attention was on the road ahead right away, but his thoughts were racing with the pictures and the odd glow in. Everything in the cabin seemed to fit together, but he was unable to put all together. Perhaps Scout was meant to meet someone. Jenny looked at the dog as Nathan said, "Anyone," and we happened to be at the right place at the right moment. When they arrived at a clearing farther into the jungle, her attitude softened, or they were in the wrong spot at the wrong time. Nathan parked the car and abruptly turned off the engine as the pea path broadened a little. The only sounds to break the nearly deafening calm were the rustle of leaves and the distant calls of birds. The forest itself seemed to be holding its breath, and the air seemed thick. Nathan opened the glove compartment, took out a flashlight, and said, "Stay here with Scout." He informed Jenny. "I'll look around." Jenny hesitated, but she could see the resolve in his eyes. "Be careful," she said, her voice just a little bit higher than a murmur. Nathan exited the vehicle, scanning the surroundings with the beam of his flashlight piercing the darkness. The terrain was uneven, covered in patches of moss and fallen branches, and his boots crunched gently against the ground as he advanced, keeping all of his senses on high alert. He only needed to go a short distance. Beyond the clearing, he discovered a tiny group of shallow trenches, each filled with something that chilled his blood. Some of the collars were corroded and old, while others were more recent, yet the leather was still soft. Nathan knelt down and picked up one of the collars, which had the word "Hope" etched on it. "What the devil is going on?" Back at the car, Scout began barking his horn while Nathan grumbled to himself. Jenny attempted to quiet him, but his cries became more frantic and louder until his tiny body began to tremble with increasing anxiety. When Nathan returned, his face was pale, and he was holding onto the collar firmly when the dog eventually stopped barking. Dozens of them are buried in pits just beyond the surface, Nathan stated in a quiet voice. Jenny's eyes widened as Nathan said, I don't know. Do you think someone is hurting these dogs? However, these collars are intentional. Someone has been collecting them, and each one has phrases inscribed on it. Jenny gazed down at the puppy, who had nestled himself against her chest with his little tail tucked in, exactly like Scout's did. What does it signify that Nathan sat between his legs? Is it a message? I don't know. But it's unsafe here. We must return. He's sitting heavily in the driver's seat, running his hand through his hair. To the station and resolve this. The return trip to town was stressful because of the weight of their discovery hanging in. Scout's tiny frame was cuddled up on Jenny's lap when he eventually fell asleep. Nathan's head was elsewhere, wondering why they had sent Scout there and who had placed those collars. But he maintained his eyes on the road. Harper heard Nathan's radio spark to life as they got closer to the town's edge. This is dispatch. You must listen to the call that Nathan took. Proceed. There has been a report. The dispatcher reported unusual activity near Pinewood Forest, stating that a local hiker saw someone loading what appeared like. They loaded animal cages into a van and left before we could obtain a license plate number, but they were on their way to you. We're on our way, Jenny. Nathan's hold on the steering wheel tightened. It's no accident that she gazed at him with a fearful yet determined expression. Shaking his head, Nathan asked if it was Nathan. No, someone is attempting to hide their traces. They pulled into the main road and searched the area for. As if sensing the stress in Nathan's eyes, Scout stirred in Jenny's lap and released a gentle whine. Jenny yelled, pointing to a parked car, as she scurried about looking for anything strange. A white van with its rear doors partly open was parked on the shoulder of the road. Nathan stopped a safe distance away, retrieved his service pistol and flashlight, and firmly warned Jenny to stay put if something goes wrong, call for help. Jenny nodded and her arms clenched tightly. Scout Nathan slowly walked up to the van, his spotlight shining on the ground in front of him, and the scene was hauntingly. As he approached, the only sound was the slight rustle of leaves in the wind. He saw that the back doors were ajar, exposing other vacant cages within, and a slight metallic odor persisted. Nathan's voice was forceful as he yelled out to the police, making his stomach turn. There was no answer, but as he rounded the corner of the van, he saw something that warmed his heart. Skip a beat and follow a trail of shoddy prints that were tiny and led into the bushes. Nathan's jaw pinched, as if he were too little to be anything other than puppies. Was taking place, but it wasn't finished yet. Nathan followed the footprints into the forest, his beam piercing the smell of damp earth and pine, as well as the crunch of leaves beneath his boots, filled the air as darkness grew. It seemed abnormally loud in the quiet as the white van sat abandoned behind him. He knelt down on the side of the road, its open doors swaying slightly in the wind. They were moving fresh into the forest in a zigzag fashion, as if to get a closer look at the prints. The animals had fled in terror, but where had they gone, and why had someone abandoned the vehicle in the middle of nowhere? Nathan's radio crackled softly, dragging him out of his reverie in such a hurry. I'm all right, Nathan. Harper, are you okay out there? Jenny's voice was worried. The van is empty, but there's a trail of poor prints, he said quietly. There was a delay on the other end, so I'm going to pursue it into the woods. Be cautious, whomever is behind this. Mist will be out there. As Nathan proceeded more into the forest, the path grew increasingly unpredictable, and the paw prints were linked by larger boot prints that indicate the animals were being chased by someone through the trees. Crept in on him, their twisted branches creating a canopy that blotted out the sky and the last of the daylight. It was smothering every sound and shadow as a possible danger, and suddenly he heard it. Nathan froze, his heart thumping, and he looked about with his flashlight. The glare eventually fell on a little, trembling figure curled up under a fallen log. It was the fur of another dog. With its eyes wide with terror and dread, it gazed up at Nathan and emitted a. Nathan whispered, "Hey there, little one." as it attempted to crawl closer with a pathetic whimper. The puppy crouched and extended a hand, hesitating for a moment before pulling itself forward to expose him. Nathan's chest constricted as he cautiously scooped up the dog after noticing something about his wounded rear leg. Recognizable collar around its neck, just like Scout's with the same. The word safe was elegantly engraved on this one. "What's happening here, Nathan?" muttered, holding the hurt puppy to his bosom. Nathan had noticed the whining, but now he heard weak, muted voices growing farther into the trees, and knew it wasn't the only sound. He swiftly retreated behind a tree, his palm naturally resting on his weapon's grip as the shouts grew louder. Approaching with a flashlight's faint glimmer piercing the foliage. "We must move them more quickly." Another speaker remarked, "I told you the van's gone," in a low, hurried tone. Anxious, "We must retrieve the other ones before someone discovers Nathan's stomach collapse." Whoever these people were close and still actively participating in whatever activity was going on here. Too near, the wounded puppy in his arms whimpered softly, and Nathan, shushing it swiftly and keeping his back against the tree to stay unseen, the voices kept getting closer to their tone. Increasingly irritated, the first speaker murmured, "We shouldn't have left the collars, since it would lead them astray." The collars weren't merely arbitrary. Nathan's thoughts were racing. Whether on purpose or out of desperation, they were a part of a system that left a trail of breadcrumbs behind. Defiance. And the person responsible was now attempting to hide their identity. As the voices passed him and headed toward the van, Nathan seized the chance to slow down. He had to quickly and carefully return the injured dog to the car as he retreated farther into the woods. Jenny was waiting tensely by the cruiser, Scout barking in her arms, when he eventually came out of the forest. When she spotted the second puppy nestled against Nathan's chest, her eyes opened, and she hurried forward to ask what had occurred. Saw him beneath a log. Nathan reported that his breath was coming in short gasps. "And I heard two voices, most likely the..." Jenny's face tightened as the people who left the vehicle tried to shift the other dogs. "We must." Nathan nodded and said a call for help. "But first we must get this tiny kid to safely," while Jenny called for help via radio. Nathan closely inspected the second. Although the puppy's leg was bruised and swollen, it didn't seem to be fractured. He was interested by the collar around its neck because the phrase "safe" seemed to go against the terrible situation the puppy was in. Jenny questioned, looking at the collar, "What do you think it means that it's been found?" "I don't know, but it seems like someone is attempting to convey a message backup arrived," Nathan said, shaking his head. Nathan informed the squad of everything he had in a matter of minutes, including 2 more patrol cars and an animal control unit. Officers swiftly devised a plan after learning the location of the van and the voices he had heard in the woods. "We'll search the area in the hopes of catching the perpetrators and saving any animals that are still there until the animal control." Scout whimpered as the crew brought both puppies into their custody, promising to care for their wounds and keep them secure. The wounded puppy was carried away, his tiny tail waving nervously. "Don't worry, buddy." Giving Scout a comforting pat, Nathan remarked, "We'll make sure they're okay as the..." Nathan felt that this was just the beginning of the collars when the officers vanished into the woods. The mysterious statements and the well-coordinated efforts to relocate the animals all suggested a more extensive operation that stretched well beyond the sleepy community of Maplewood. And he looked at Jenny, who was observing Scout with a contemplative. She asked, "Do you think the person who left those collars wanted us to find them?" Nathan gave me a slow nod, and I believe the person knew exactly what they... Nathan observed the officers disappearing into the woodland to conduct a search while he stood close to the patrol cars. His thoughts were racing as he attempted to piece together the pieces of this increasingly strange case involving the suspects. Jenny knelt down to soothe Scout, who had been whimpering quietly ever before the wounded puppy was removed. Nathan's heart was pulled by the sight, but he understood that there was no time to wallow in feelings. Answers were required. "What now?" Jenny questioned in a hushed voice, but Nathan was resolute and let out a deep breath. "We waited for the team to provide an update, but I have a feeling that this is more than just a small group of people in the woods, those collars hope. And safe, they indicate something, and I'm not sure why someone wanted us to locate these dogs." Jenny scowled as she ran her fingers through Scout's velvety fur. thinking that the same individuals were attempting to relocate them. Nathan, you believe it might be a whistleblower, someone inside trying to reveal what's going on. Acknowledged, but if that's the case, they're engaging in risky behavior, and whoever is responsible isn't kidding around. Nathan was startled out of his reverie by the radio on his belt crackling to life. Harper, this is Delta Unit. 2 suspects have been taken into custody next to the abandoned van, and there are no more dogs visible. Yet we're still looking. Nathan grasped the receiver and realized. He turned to Jenny, his jaw clenched, securing the suspects and keeping me updated. Nathan shivered as she stood up and remarked, I have 2 of them. Hopefully we'll get some answers. Do you think they'll talk? Normally, those concerned in such matters don't work together, but perhaps they made a mistake and left something behind at. Nathan made the decision to re-examine the message they had discovered while they waited for additional information about the van or the cabin. He unfurled the paper in Scout's box and looked at the beautiful handwriting once. Additionally, they must be protected. Have faith in the dogs. They will guide you to the words of truth. Appeared almost poetic, but Nathan couldn't get rid of the impression that there was more to it. Trust the dogs to tell the truth. Jenny looked at Nathan and inquired whether he still had the first collar. Were they supposed to uncover? Nathan nodded and pulled. He took the Hope engraved collar from his pocket and placed it next to Scout's collar and the note, attempting to determine whether there was. Jenny cocked her head, her brow furrowing, as if there was some secret connection between them. If the words on the collar serve as hints, like to breadcrumbs in a trail, leading to what? Nathan inquired, clearly frustrated, and Jenny paused before answering, perhaps not what, but who. Whoever placed these messages must have been aware that the dogs would eventually discover a trail scout who would be interested in following them. The puppy sprung up on his little legs and pointed his nose in the direction of Nathan and Jenny with a little bark. Nathan's eyes narrowed as he barked again, this time more forcefully, as though he were trying to communicate something. You believe he is aware of something? Jenny shrugged when she picked up the puppies. We can't always explain intuition, but perhaps he recalls Nathan or something. Scout wriggled in Jenny's arms as he reached for his flashlight and pointed toward the woods, letting us see where he led. Nathan led the way into the woodland, barking enthusiastically as they followed a dim trail that swerved away from them. Officers had observed Scout's behavior, which looked to be getting more heated with each step as they moved deeper, to get quieter and thicker, almost as though the woodland was holding its breath. After traveling for roughly 15 minutes, they came to a small clearing where a wooden, decaying shed stood in the middle. This doesn't feel right, Jenny. Nathan shuddered at the sight of the ancient timbers covered with ivy. Nathan nodded, his hand resting on the holster as he whispered, holding Scout close. Of his weapon remained behind me. Nathan pushed up the shed's door, making a loud creaking sound that reverberated menacingly in the room's calm air was only faintly illuminated by one dusty window, although it was sufficient to see the eerie scene in front of them. Pictures of dogs, some of which were displayed on the walls, wearing like Scouts, collars with inscriptions etched on them under the picture stacks, were arranged on a wide corkboard, each file labeled with names and dates. Occupied a corner of the room that was lined with notes and maps that were joined by red string. Jenny moved closer to meet her eyes, broad as she processed everything. What is this? Nathan went to the corkboard with his flashlight shining on the intricate network of data that includes handwritten notes and the map's indicated location throughout the state. The target is secured, with the extraction location and no interference scrawled in the margins. Phase 2 is in progress. Hopefully, it will be safe. Nathan stated in a quiet voice, some sort of operation. Whoever is behind this has been. Scout had been after these dogs for a while, when she gave them a piercing bark to alert them to a metal box in the corner. Nathan knelt down and cautiously opened the room, exposing a number of collars each. These aren't the same as one etched with a different term, such as courage, strength, or freedom. Jenny's voice was shaking as she said, just dogs, which are signals that someone is using to send a message. Nathan's thoughts were racing, trying to figure out what all the collars, messages, and pictures meant. A puzzle with far too many missing pieces. Yet it was obvious that whoever planned this was incredibly dedicated. Whatever their cause, Nathan and both of them froze when they heard a limb shatter outside the shed. He pulled his firearm and switched off his flashlight, telling Jenny to keep quiet. Nathan's heart was racing when he heard footsteps approaching the door. Who was it? Nathan yelled at the door. Slowly, it creaked open to show a man silhouetted against the moon. An elderly woman entered her gaze and landed on Scout. Her face was wrinkled with age, but her eyes were piercing and acute. "You found them," she murmured quietly, her voice brimming with urgency and relief. "I've been waiting for you, Nathan." He lowered his rifle a little and narrowed his eyes as he observed the older woman, who didn't seem armed or menacing, but there was no denying the intensity in her eyes. Scout. Meanwhile, he wildly waggled his tail, and the woman bent down and held out a hand to the dog as if she recognized him, who rushed to her right away and nuzzled her palm. "I know you've gone through a lot, don't you, little one?" she whispered while softly petting Scout's head before turning to face Nathan. "And Jenny, I appreciate you locating him and heeding Nathan's signals. You'll need to explain what's happening." So you exchange a quick look with Jenny, who was still clutching the second collar. The woman straightened up and brushed the grime off her face as he firmly asked, "Who are you, and what do these collars mean?" "I'm Evelyn Hayes, and I suppose you might consider me the guardian of types." Pointing to the pictures and records that lined the walls of the shed, "is a record of the dogs we've saved and the individuals we've tried, not just a collection of unrelated facts." Jenny scowled and moved closer to the board to prevent herself from doing what Evelyn hesitated, lowering her eyes to the Scout, who was now seated peacefully next her from. "There is a well-funded, well-organized, and vicious group that takes advantage of these animals, that views dogs as instruments rather than living beings, and has been using them for illicit experiments and trafficking. Crew has been trying to save as many as possible, but time is running out." Nathan's hold on his. Suddenly, as the puzzle's pieces, the collars, the mysterious notes, the abandoned van, started to fit together, indicated something much larger than he had expected. But he was still plagued by the question of why the college. He questioned, "Why don't you just take the dogs to a shelter or call the police?" Evelyn's lips squeezed into a. "We've tried the narrow line, but this group has ties everywhere, including, if we're not careful, law enforcement. The pets we save wind up back in their hands. The collars are a method to communicate, to let people know that you are a trustworthy person." Jenny gazed. Evelyn responded, "I'm shocked that you're saying that this operation is so deep that even the police can't be trusted. Swiftly but sufficiently to make it risky to include anyone who hasn't been well screened. So we leave the dogs with." Nathan's mind raced as he evaluated the actions of those we hope will act as caring individuals. Her explanations clarified the hues, the tones, and even Scout's behavior, left in such a calculated manner. But it also prompted more queries that Evelyn appeared hesitant to respond, and he asked the dogs, "Why leave them out in the open like that? Why don't you get in touch with us directly?" Evelyn's shoulders are drooping. Since they hold the secret to everything, each of them has experienced something, witnessed something that might. Throughout this operation, the collars serve as a kind of breadcrumb that guides us to the next phase, but saving them isn't the only goal. Jenny's expression was a mixture of amazement and astonishment as she looked at the pictures on the wall. "It's about finding the truth." "How long have you been doing this?" Evelyn answered, her voice tinted with, "We've lost more than we've saved due to fatigue, but I'm not giving up." For a little while, the room was silence as Evelyn's comments weighed heavily on them until we had permanently shut them down. Nathan looked at the puppy at her feet and then at the injured pup they had rescued earlier, like a thick fog. They were both defenseless victims in a much bigger conflict that didn't appear to be resolved. "What do you need from us?" he questioned. When he finally spoke in a steady but firm tone, Evelyn looked up at him, her eyes full of, with a mixture of appreciation and urgency. "I need your faith and assistance since a transport is arriving tonight not far from here. If we can catch it, we may be able to save the other dogs and collect the proof we need to present." After this procedure, Nathan had a nagging suspicion that this wasn't what he had signed up for, but the trust in Scout's eyes and the resolve in Evelyn's voice left. As the sun started to fall, Evelyn lay out the strategy, leaving him with little choice. She had intelligence indicating that transportation will be traveling down a remote road around 5 miles from their location. Though she thought they could intercept it with the element of surprise Jenny looked for, it would be strictly secured. Uncomfortable. This sounds risky, and if they have weapons, they very likely will be. Evelyn acknowledged. But we won't go in unprepared. I have backup waiting for you at the rendezvous point, where you've been working. Nathan nodded slowly. I need your help to get there after you've been with me for years. We'll assist, but I won't risk lives if this goes south, so I'll bring in reinforcements. Unnecessarily fair enough, Evelyn said, reaching out a hand and saying, thank you very much. The drive to rendezvous point was tense, with a lot of expectation in the automobile. Scout sat calmly on. Nathan kept his gaze on Jenny's lap, his petite form quivering a little as though he could sense the seriousness of the situation. When they got there, his mind was racing with a mixture of terror and resolve. A small group of men and women in plain clothing who were obviously experienced welcomed them. Evelyn gave them a brief introduction, outlining their respective roles in the operation. Each had a serene assurance that, as they waited for the transport to arrive, Nathan knelt down to calm him. But the stakes were still high. You've been through a lot, haven't you, friend? He whispered as Scout scratched behind his puppy ears. Hopefully this is. When Scout last wagged his tail, Nathan's eyes were bright with a mix of determination and faith. Despite the tension in the air, Jenny came up to her, and she couldn't help but grin. Regardless of what occurs tonight, we are acting appropriately. The party waited in a clearing, and Nathan nodded while keeping his eyes focused on the horizon. Let's hope it's enough. As darkness struck, Nathan was surrounded by a deep forest that muffled the sounds of the outer world. Watching the group Evelyn had put together as they got ready for the interception, he leaned against his police cruiser, quietly and effectively inspecting equipment, giving brief directions, and keeping a focused silence. Despite their composed demeanors, Scout could feel the weight of what they were going to do. Atmosphere remained near Jenny, pressing his tiny body against her leg, caressed his fur absently while glancing between Nathan and Evelyn, who were standing at the edge of the clearing. Jenny remarked softly, "This plan feels bigger than us," in an eager whisper. Nathan broke the silence by turning to face her, his face unreadable. Acknowledged. But occasionally we are unable to select the battles that confront us. Jenny agreed, her forehead pinched with worry. And if this goes in the wrong direction, we won't know who we're up against. Against Nathan, he took a deep breath and kept his eyes on the road ahead, which was dark. Not incorrect. However, if we look at Scout and that injured dog, we discovered that whatever is going on here is wrong. Evelyn came up to them, her face etched with resolve, saying, "Don't do anything who will. It's time for the transfer." Nathan nodded and adjusted the lamp on his belt. He will arrive in less than 10 minutes. Are you both prepared? Jenny paused before answering, saying, "We're ready, Evelyn," in a low but firm tone. Remember to give them a comforting smile, but it didn't really help to reduce the stress. Our objective is to intercept the transport document, everything with the least amount of conflict possible. Nathan's jaw clenched as he said, "Secure the dogs. No heroics, no unnecessary risks." As they positioned themselves, Nathan couldn't get rid of the uneasiness that was beginning to settle in his chest. Every rustling leaf and snapping twig made the forest seem alive with invisible eyes, boosting Scout's anxiety. Jenny appeared especially attentive, with his nose twitching and his ears pricked up. The headlights of the approaching vehicle were creating long, eerie shadows as it hunkered behind a group of shrubs close to the road. Evelyn lifted her hand to signal hush through the trees as the car. When Nathan got closer, the truck was bigger than he had anticipated, its massive frame rumbling like a beast down the gravel road. Evelyn's crew rushed into action as the car slowed down, close to the clearing in the darkness. 2 members blocked the route with. Evelyn stopped the truck as others came out of the shadows, their spotlights piercing the night. Her voice commanded the driver to pause, causing the car to shudder to a stop. Nathan and Jenny remained behind to observe Evelyn and her colleagues approach the cab. The driver was a burly man with an anxious, "What's this about?" His hands were shaking clearly as his look rolled down the window. Evelyn displayed a badge as he demanded his voice, gruff but tinged with fear. Something Nathan was previously unaware of. Wildlife Protection Unit. We have grounds to suspect that this vehicle is transporting. When the illicit goods exited the automobile, the driver paused and looked at the Nathan's intuition told him something wasn't right at the rear of the truck. Nathan whispered to Jenny, "Check the back." And Jenny nodded while holding Scout close as Nathan walked toward the back of the. As he unlatched the doors and swung them open, he heard a slight whimpering sound and his heartbeat sped, displaying a tragic image of numerous dogs trapped into inadequately sized cages. Looked back at him with wide, terrified eyes, full with fear and the stench of pee. Some of the dogs were obviously hurt, their fur matted with blood, and Nathan felt his stomach turn. Scout let out a low whine as Jenny screamed, and her palm flew to her mouth. "Oh my God." Nathan squirmed in Jenny's arms, seemingly wanting to get into the truck and console the other dogs. "They're dehydrated," he stated coldly, glancing over the cages with his flashlight. "If we don't move quickly, some of them might not make it." Evelyn showed up by his side, her face displaying a mixture of rage and sadness. "We must leave them now." Nathan inquired, "What about the driver?" When we secured the dogs, Nathan nodded and hurried to open, to which she answered, "HEK being detained." Jenny assisted him with the cages, her hands shaking as she removed a little, malnourished puppy from one of them. Suddenly, the dog let out a feeble whine and nuzzled in her bosom as though seeking comfort. "It's okay," she muttered, crying. As they worked, Evelyn's radio crackled, "And you're safe now," running down her face. One of her team members who was working as a lookout rang the alarm to bring the situation to life. Two of the arriving vehicles appear to be reinforcements, and Evelyn's expression has hardened. Nathan's heart was racing as the team moved to load the dogs into the van. The jungle was once again alive with suspense as they hurried to act as the sound of approaching engines got louder. As though alerting them to the danger that was approaching, Scout gave a loud bark. Jenny handed, "What should we do, Nathan?" The dog she was carrying to one of Evelyn's teammates then grasped Nathan's arm. "That we don't hesitate to safeguard these dogs, regardless of the initial entering." Cars screamed to a stop close to the area, and individuals in black clothes appeared as their headlights sliced through the confusion. With masks covering their faces, they advanced deliberately, their gaze sweeping the. "This is a protected operation," Evelyn yelled, placing herself between the men and the truck. One of the men walked forward, his voice icy, and said, "You have no authority here." Nathan moved up next to him, threatening, "You've messed up by getting in the way of us. Get down so you won't regret it." I don't believe that Evelyn's hand is resting on his weapon's holster. The masked guys standing across from Evelyn's crew created a tense atmosphere in the clearing, with the truck's headlights shining on their shadowy silhouettes. Nathan's heartbeat accelerated as he evaluated the situation. Evelyn's crew was outnumbered, and these men appeared to be serious about their business. But the chances weren't in their favor. Scout gave a low groan from Jenny's embrace, his small body quivering but resolute. Jenny's eyes darted anxiously between the two groups as she tightened her hold on him. Evelyn stated firmly, "Let the dogs go. Despite the obvious danger, your voice remains firm. We have proof." The man in front, who seemed to be the leader, laughed darkly. "There's nowhere for you to run. You think this concludes with." Nathan took a stand. "But you have no idea who you're dealing with. Perhaps I'm not resolute, but I know enough to stop you right here. So leave immediately." Grows ugly. The leader's face hardens, and neither your little rescue mission nor you, officer, frightened me. As the guys stretched out their methodical and careful motions, the air became heavier. Evelyn's crew consolidated their position, preparing for whatever was about to happen. Nathan's fingers hovered above his. Suddenly, each muscle in his body tensed up like a spring, as if the violence would break out, and everyone's attention would be broken by a loud bark. He halted in front of one of the trucks and turned to face Scout, who had escaped Jenny's grasp and run toward it. "What's he doing, Jenny?" Cages are barking loudly and saturating the door. With a worried tone in her voice, Nathan followed Scout's eyes and froze. A larger German shepherd dog with brilliant amber eyes was staring back at them from inside the cage, but it wasn't just. Nathan was drawn to the dog's appearance because, in contrast to the others, it had a collar around its neck. Evelyn Nathan called out his voice from one that had a tiny blinking device connected. Evelyn rushed over, her eyes brightening as she said, "You must see this immediately. Admire the shepherd's unusual collar and questioned in a tone that was a mixture of interest and dread. Nathan squatted down and took a closer look at the gadget. It seemed to be some. The commander of the masked men made a step, possibly using a camera or some sort of tracker. He said in a mocking tone, "Smart dog. Isn't he too bad you won't have enough time to determine what that collar represents?" Evelyn turned to him, her Russian fierce. "What are you concealing?" Nathan's mind raced if the man had smirked, but had not spoken, since his silence was more telling than any words could have been. The tracker collar indicated that someone else was keeping an eye on someone who might be much more dangerous than the man. He quickly grabbed his phone and took a picture of it while they were facing each other, then turned to look at Evelyn. He replied firmly, "We need to get this dog out of here," and Evelyn nodded her head. The commander said agreed, "But we're not leaving without the others. Even if you escape here tonight, you won't get very far." He's amused. Nathan disregarded him and concentrated on opening the cage for the two dogs, saying, "You'll never escape what's coming." Shared a quick look as though speaking in silence before the shepherd took up protective positions in front of the smaller puppy. The confrontation persisted, with neither party prepared to release Nathan's hold on his holster. Evelyn's team held their ground as the masked men started to approach, but the tension was unbearably high. The air was immediately filled with the sound of sirens, their cries becoming louder by the moment as the masked guys froze as their commander muttered obscenities. Evelyn looked at Nathan, her face showing a mixture of relief and fear. "Did you call for help?" Nathan shook his head, saying it wasn't me. Two police cars screamed to a stop at the edge of the clearing, and cops poured out as the sirens became unbearable. The masked men immediately realized they were outmatched after drawing their firearms. One of the officers yelled, "Drop your weapons and get on the ground." His voice pierced through the confusion, and the leader of. After a moment of hesitation, the man with the mask raised his hands after glancing between his squad and the officers. In surrender, indicating to his men to follow suit, they dropped too. Nathan let out a breath as their knees and weapons clattered to the floor. Unaware that a wave of relief was flowing over him, he turned to Evelyn, who, as the officers started cuffing the canines, she was already giving her staff instructions to secure them and get them ready for transportation. One of the men went up to Nathan, and we received an anonymous tip about something odd. Activity in the area, the officer explained, and it appears that we arrived right before Nathan's wrinkle in his brow. Did they say anything else about the anonymous tip? The officer shook his head, merely gave us the address, and instructed us to hurry. Evelyn seemed reflective as her eyes strayed to the German shepherd keeping guard by Scout's side. "It's probably," she whispered. "It seems like someone wants us to succeed." Nathan looked at the shepherd. His thoughts were racing with potential suspects, such as who had alerted the authorities and what the collar's actual meaning was. Dog wars, the dogs were put into transport, and the masked guys were led away. Van's Nathan couldn't get rid of the impression that they had only begun to explore a far deeper mystery of the German. Nathan briefly believed that Shepard was trying to communicate with him when their amber eyes locked. Something significant when the clearing cleared and the remaining masked men were driven off in police vehicles. The canines, now placed into transport vans, moaned as the unsettling silence returned. Their fear was subtly there, but gradually diminished by Evelyn's team's soothing tones and tender hands. The German shepherd and Scout were standing next to Nathan and Jenny, while the bigger dog was still wearing the enigmatic collar. That had raised concerns in everyone's minds. Nathan knelt down and hovered his palm close to the shepherd's head. "Let's see what you're hiding, buddy," he whispered quietly, his voice firm but careful. The shepherd tensed but didn't snarl or turn away. Instead, its perceptive amber eyes were fixed on Nathan. Nathan slowly reached for the collar of. His fingers grazing the chilly metal, he discovered a clasp and gingerly took it off, raising it for further inspection. Up close, the gadget was tiny and barely noticeable save from its blinking. Evelyn approached the light at its center, her face grave, but simply a tracker, she whispered softly, "but it also appears to be a data storage device." Nathan turned the collar over in his hands and saw a small etching on it, suggesting that someone intended to keep an eye on this dog and possibly more. Side. It was a series of digits that resembled a serial code. "Does this indicate the he said, looking at Evelyn. Was Shepherd a part of something bigger? And she nodded. The owner of this collar might still be alive if this dog was being tracked. Jenny grimaced as she watched her search while clutching Scout close. But why would? When someone goes to such lengths for a dog, what makes him so unique? The shepherd seems to grasp the conversation, whimpered softly, and pushed Nathan's arm with its nose. Faintly grinned. I'm not sure what he said, but I believe he was attempting to convey a message to us. While Evelyn's team started to pack up their gear, she remained with Nathan, Jenny, and the dogs. We must determine who owns this collar, she continued, and quickly determine whether this is related. Nathan agreed. I'll take the lead. We might be dealing with something far more serious than dog trafficking. Call her to the station in the hopes that our tech team could get data from it. Evelyn paused before adding that we also need to locate a secure location for these dogs, particularly this one, she said, pointing to the German Shepherd who is at the heart of, regardless of our feelings. The group went back to Evelyn's place where the rescued dogs were fed, watered, and medical treatment. Jenny and Nathan assisted with the intake procedure and meticulously recorded each dog's condition. However, the German Shepherd refused to leave Nathan's side, and his newfound protector Jenny observed the shepherd looks at you with admiration and wonder, as if he's picked you out, murmured, with a hint of wonder in her voice. Nathan laughed and scratched the dog behind the Scout barked and wagging his ears. So I guess I don't have much of a choice even though I didn't exactly sign up for this. Tail as though in agreement. The scene brought Jenny a rare moment of humor despite the stress of the day as night fell. With the German Shepherd at his feet and the collar resting on the table next to him, Nathan found himself seated outside the building. Now that its pulsing light had gone out, he stared at it, his thoughts racing with inquiries about the origins of this dog, his experiences, and the reasons behind. Arrived at this very moment, Evelyn joined him with 2 coffee mugs, gave him one, and sat down. You did well today, she added, adding that not everyone would have stood forward. Nathan shrugged and took a sip of his coffee, saying, I just did what felt right. Evelyn agreed, her face softening. Yes, those dogs didn't deserve what was happening to them. Now that they have a chance because of you. The shepherd moved and rested its head on Nathan's knee, which he caressed absently. Do you believe we'll ever be able to relax the strain in his chest? He said, figure out what's really going on here. Evelyn gave him a small smile. All of the parts of the puzzle, the collar, the dogs, the men we captured, have already begun, but it will take time. We'll get there, Nathan said, looking down at the shepherd that had fallen asleep with its eyes closed. I just hope it's. He whispered that inside the building, Jenny was caring for a Scout who had. He had finally started to unwind after the events of the day, and she watched with a smile as his tiny body curled up in a warm bed. Tranquility, but she kept thinking about the German Shepherd and the collar. She was certain that there was more to this tale than that. As she shut off the lights and made her way to the door, she couldn't get rid of the thought that this was only the start of something much larger. When the morning sun streamed through the building's huge windows, illuminating the resting dogs, Nathan woke up earlier than normal and sat next to the German. The deactivated collar on Shepherd's side lay on the desk in front of him, and he gazed at it fixedly as though. Evelyn entered the room with a tablet in her hand and said, Good morning, gently welcoming it to divulge its secrets. Nathan sat up taller, nodding, and I have some updates. What did you discover? On her iPad, Evelyn displayed a number of emails and reports that our tech team had successfully extracted from the collar. It is more than just a tracker. It is also a recording device, and there is even some video footage. What's more bizarre is, location information shows that within the past year, this dog has traveled across multiple nations. Whoever owned this dog was. Nathan leaned forward, his brow wrinkled, and covered a lot of terrain. What's on the? Evelyn paused as she heard the unsettling voices in several languages, with some talking about the illicit wildlife trade and others implying animal research. This wasn't only. It was much darker, and the weight of what she said hung in Nathan's mind. Nathan looked at the shepherd, who appeared to notice the change in energy in the air. As if providing wordless comfort, the dog stood with its nose pressed on Nathan's fingers, while Evelyn went on, theirs. Additionally, one of the voices on the audio refers to a particular place, a facility. It sounds like the shepherd might have escaped from Nathan's jaw tight in a distant area of the country. We must take action if such is the case, because there may be other animals stranded there. Evelyn nodded, agreeing. I've already reached out to some people who can assist us. But Nathan, this is risky territory. Whoever is responsible for this won't give up lightly. Jenny entered the room as Evelyn went to make more preparations. Scout remarked, noticing the tightness on her heels. What's going on? Jenny's look changed from one of curiosity as Nathan updated her on the most recent events too. I don't see any other option, so I'm worried that you're heading to that facility. Nathan retorted, we must take action, Jenny, if there are more animals in danger. I'm coming with you, Nathan said, shaking his head as she bit her lip and looked at Scout. Jenny crossed her arms and looked away, saying, I can't put you in harm's way because it's too dangerous. Unwaveringly, you're not doing this alone, and if things go wrong, you'll need someone who can manage the dogs. Nathan exhaled when he saw there was a German shepherd barking softly, perhaps in agreement. There was no need to argue with Jenny, he added, but you follow my example. Hazard's Evelyn came back a few seconds later, looking grim but resolute that we have. A team is gathering, and we will depart after sunset. The facility is situated in a densely forested area. Location, so we must approach cautiously. Nathan agreed, his determination strengthening. Let's do this while the squad got ready for the mission supplies throughout the day. Were packed, maps were examined, and tactics were talked upon while the German shepherd stayed. Its presence near Nathan served as a constant reminder of their purpose, and by nightfall, the gang was prepared for two. Cars left the building and drove toward the far-off place shown in the caller's data. After hours of operating the vehicles, there was a noticeable sense of anxiety in the air, and everyone was keenly aware of the dangers that lay ahead. Stopped on a remote dirt road, and the group got off in silence. Evelyn led the way through the thick woodland that encircled the place, her torch piercing the night. The facility loomed ahead as they approached the coordinates, and a dim glow of lights emerged through the foliage. Nathan gave the group the signal to stop because of the glaring concrete structure that didn't seem to belong in a natural setting. We'll divide into two teams, Evelyn take Jenny, he said, barely raising his voice above a whisper. Evelyn nodded, her face grave, and Scout checked the perimeter. I'll go inside with the others. Nathan and his group moved silently across the damp forest floor to the main entrance of the facility. The German shepherd remained by Nathan's side, its gaze vigilant and its ears perked up. The walls were lined with cages and apparatus. The air was antiseptic and frigid, and dim. When Nathan heard whimpering, his heart tightened, and he swiftly but carefully scanned each. He searched one chamber for indications of life and discovered rows of animal cages. Dogs, cats, and even exotic animals all appear undernourished and scared. The image of wrath seething beneath the surface made my stomach turn. We need to get them out, he added in a stern voice. In the meantime, Evelyn and Jenny walked around the outside of the building, Scout using their flashlight to scan the darkness. Jenny's heart raced as she followed the quick barking as it darted toward a group of shrubs, and what she discovered made her blood rush. She yelled out to Evelyn, who promptly joined her, as she was approaching a secret door that was partially disguised by greenery. Evelyn's tone was urgent. So let's take a look at the two women. They cautiously made their way along the passageway, which led to a little room brimming with computers and paperwork. Evelyn started looking over the papers right away, her eyes expanding when she saw. Nathan and his colleagues discovered that back inside the main building, they were opening cages and releasing the German shepherd protected the frightened creatures with its soothing presence. For the recently freed animals, Nathan was abruptly drawn to a sound coming from the corridor, a jagged metallic. With a clang, he motioned for the team to remain silent while reaching for his holster. Got closer, Nathan's pulse accelerated as he braced himself for whatever was about to happen. Nathan clutched his flashlight in one hand and his sidearm in the other, his heart racing as the German shepherd's metallic clanging increased in volume. Its hackles lifted as it growled low at his side, smothering every sound that was amplified in the air. The source of the noise abruptly appeared from around the chilly, antiseptic hallway. A man in a lab coat in the corner paused in mid-step, frightened by Nathan's appearance. His face flashed with panic as his gaze flitted to the group and then to the now empty cages behind them. He then turned to. Nathan yelled for the man to stop running, his voice reverberating down the corridor. Paused only a moment before running down the hallway, with Nathan running after him. The German Shepherd. "I'll take care of the chase." He barked at his crew over his shoulder, keeping pace easily protected. As LED Nathan navigates a network of corridors, more indications of the building's dark purpose glass windows are revealed at each bend. Showed rooms with odd equipment paperwork strewn all over desks. With abandoned cages, the smell of chemicals permeated the air, and people were afraid. Nathan followed his adrenaline as the man in the lab coat blasted through a set of double doors. He entered a huge room that was filled with blinking machinery and monitors, with a massive glass enclosure in the middle. Nathan demanded, brandishing his firearm at the man, "Who are you?" With only a few strewn about equipment and handcuffs. The man lifted his hands, breathing heavily. "What's going on?" "I'm just a..." The German Shepherd growled and stepped closer as though to say, "I don't know anything," the technician mumbled. The man's eyes shifted uneasily between the dog and the cop, reinforcing Nathan's desire for information. "Please," he pleaded, "I only follow orders here. I'm not in command." Nathan's jaw tensed before he spoke. Before the man could respond, a voice crackled from an overhead speaker, and I, the person in authority, asked, "What is this place?" Was calculating, icy, and uncannily serene. "I see you located my facility, officer, Nathan." The German Shepherd barked and swiveled toward a concealed camera as it whirled about, trying to find the source of the voice. "You've caused quite the disruption, but I must admit the voice said from the corner of the room. "I'm impressed. It's not often that someone makes it this far." "Nathan, who are you?" demanded, and the voice laughed. "What are you doing here?" "It doesn't matter what. Issues is that you've tampered with something that is completely outside of your comprehension. But since you're here, allow me to." One screen of the room's monitors flared to life, showing live footage of the facility. Revealed the animals, while another showed Evelyn and Jenny feverishly going through paperwork in the concealed area. After Nathan's crew was released, they gathered close to the facility's exit. The voice said, "You can now leave. Police and bring your priceless creatures along, or you may delve farther, but I promise you won't like what you discover." The voice sighed very well, but Nathan's hold on his handgun tightened. "I'm not going anywhere until I know the truth. Don't claim I didn't tell you that the room's lights went out and the monitors went dark before Nathan could react." Flared menacingly, and then the sound of a loud mechanical hum filled the air. Of the building's doors slamming, the man in the lab coat moaning. "Oh no, what's happening, Nathan?" In Nathan's head, the stranger muttered, "Demand the lockdown," and sealed us. Evelyn, Jenny, and the other members of his squad were all stuck within the German. Nathan asked the technician where the control room was, and Shepherd gave him a piercing bark as though to get him to do something. With a forceful voice, the man paused before pointing to a door on the opposite side of the room. "But it's heavy." Nathan quickly signaled the technician to move after securing. "He's still holding his firearm, and you're joining me to unlock the door." The German Shepherd and Nathan, the technician, headed to the control room, where the door was strengthened. The technician fumbled uncomfortably, his hands shaking, using a fingerprint scanner and keypad to enter the code, and when he touched the scanner with his thumb, the door opened, revealing a chamber with further monitors and a huge console. Nathan shoved the guy inside and started looking at one monitor for any indications of his crew. He observed Evelyn and Jenny blocking the entrance to the secret room, their expressions tense, yet focused on another member of his squad. Nathan sought to calm the released animals in spite of the escalating chaos before asking the technician to end the lockdown. The man murmured, his voice shaking, "Now I can't." Only he could overcome it. The technician must have hesitated for a while before nodding. Nathan snapped, "There is a manual override," which Nathan conducted without hesitation despite the fact that it is dangerous. The German Shepherd stood by Nathan's side while the technician worked, its eyes focused on the door. Nathan couldn't help but be in awe of the dog's bravery and steadfast devotion to get through this. When he heard footsteps in a hallway outside the control room, he whispered more to himself than to anybody else. Nathan snapped back to reality, tensely raised his rifle, and faced the German. The door exploded as the shepherd, determined to defend its new comrade, roared low in its throat. Door, and Nathan saw a dark figure standing directly in front of him. The moment of truth had come. As the shadowy figure walked forward, Nathan steadied his pistol and took measured breaths. The fluorescent lights in the control room flashed menacingly, creating long shadows that moved over the walls. A German shepherd placed itself between Nathan and the intruder, protecting him with a harsh bark. The person who came was tall, with a hooded jacket partially hiding his features. He gave off an air of cool calculation. Nathan, a frightening CNS officer, looked around the room with authority in his eyes. "I didn't think you'd get this far, Nathan," he remarked in a suave voice, the same one that had been heard over the intercom. Tightened his hold on the gun. "Who are you, guy? And where is this place?" Grinned and moved closer, realizing that you were standing amid the remains of something much bigger than you could have ever imagined. Network based on exploration, innovation, and yes, profit, but you wouldn't comprehend why individuals like you adhere to rules and morality while being oblivious to the opportunities that exist. Beyond Nathan stepped closer, his eyes unblinking. "I comprehend enough to recognize that you are abusing these animals by treating them like commodities, which is unacceptable. Of living things." The man's hollow laugh reverberated across the space. "Do you believe that these animals are being exploited because they are wearing collars that are revolutionary? Even though studies are done for the greater benefit, you would much rather play hero than consider the wider picture." Nathan's smirk vanished as he shot back. "I'm shutting this down whether you like it or not. You're welcome to try, but I should caution you that this facility doesn't currently leave any loose ends." Evelyn and Jenny were still as the displays flickered back to life, showing scenes from all throughout the facility. Nathan's team was confined to the secret chamber, their features tight as they tried to protect the documents they found. Was seen causing harm to the released animals as they rushed and precisely moved toward an emergency escape. The shadowy man. He responded, "You're not just risking your life, officer, you're endangering all of them," pointing to the screens you can see. "I don't suppose I know," but Nathan's jaw tensed and his resolve hardened. "Do you really think you can save everyone?" The German shepherd snarled as the shadowy guy approached the control panel, his hand groping for a concealed switch. Bare its fangs, and Nathan brandished his weapon. "Don't even consider it," warned the man, who froze before gently raising his hands. "All right," he murmured mockingly. He sounded like he was giving up. "But tell me, officer, how far you're willing to go. Are you willing to give up something?" Nathan didn't answer. Instead, indicated that the technician should bypass the lockdown. Paused, anxiously glanced between Nathan and the dark man. "I can't. He won't do anything." But Nathan cut him off with a strong, "You have my." The technician reluctantly nodded and started typing commands, saying, "Word, just do it." The only sounds coming from the console were the quiet click of the keyboard and the hum of the machinery. The German shepherd never left the mysterious man's side, keeping its eyes watchful. The technician announced that the lockdown was ending after what seemed like an age. Nathan experienced a wave of relief when he realized that the exits would be operating in 30 seconds. However, it was brief because the dark figure lunged toward the control panel, his hand grabbing for the concealed switch. The German shepherd responded right away, jumping forward and throwing the man off balance, causing them to fall to the ground. Nathan swiftly secured the intruder with a set of zip ties while the dog snarled and pinned the man down. As the lockdown ended, Nathan's radio crackled, and he thanked the shepherd for his fine work. "We're prepared to move the animals out," according to one of his team members. So Nathan nodded and spoke into the radio, "Well, keep them flowing and remain vigilant. This is almost over." He turned back to face the shadowy figure and knelt down to look into his eyes. "It's over," he whispered, adding, "You're going to answer for." The man laughed darkly at everything you did. "And you believe that this is the end for me." Nathan may have said, "It starts with you, but you've barely touched the surface of others bigger and more powerful." Once, as though in agreement, the German shepherd barked, and Nathan couldn't help but smile. "Let's leave," he said. The shadowy figure was bound and waited for the technician to follow them as they left the control room. Nathan reconnected with Evelyn and Jenny as the authorities moved through the facility. Evelyn gave him a folder with all of the documents, and both women appeared relieved to see him. Nathan agreed when she stated that it was sufficient to reveal what had been happening. His appreciation is clear. Nice work. Let's make sure the appropriate people see it by. By the time they arrived to the exit, the dawn had already begun to rise, bathing the woodland where the released animals were in a warm glow. Were being placed in transport vehicles, their terrified expressions gradually changing to ones of security. Nathan turned to face Jenny and Evelyn and said, "We did it." His voice was a little tired, but triumphed the German. The shepherd stood by him, its tail gently waving as though it recognized their triumph as the convoy. Nathan couldn't help but think back on what had happened that night as it started its journey back to the rehabilitation facility. They had rescued many lives, endured danger, and discovered a sinister organization. Lives, but more significantly, they had demonstrated that kindness and bravery could triumph despite adversity by. By the time they arrived to the exit, the dawn had already begun to rise, bathing the woodland where the released animals were in a warm glow. Were being placed in transport vehicles, their terrified expressions gradually changing to ones of security. "We accomplished it," Nathan replied, turned to face Evelyn and Jenny. His voice was tinged with. The German shepherd stood by his side, its tail tagging with both triumph and exhaustion, wagging gently as though it recognized their triumph as the convoy started its return trip to the. Nathan couldn't help but think back on what had happened that night in the rehabilitation facility. They had saved many lives, exposed a sinister operation, and faced danger. But more significantly, they had shown that even in the midst of darkness, compassion and bravery might triumph. Nathan looked at the German shepherd and patted its head, saying quietly, "You deserve some rest, buddy." The dog responded by waving its tail, its eyes full of loyalty and tiredness. But Nathan's mind was far away. From Sleepy, the final words of the mysterious guy replayed in his head. "You've barely scratched the surface." It was a terrifying reminder that there were still people out there who considered animals to be nothing more than commodities of life or worth more than their monetary value. He gripped the driving wheel more tightly. And this triumph was important, but it was only the start. When they arrived at the rehabilitation facility and were greeted by a group of volunteers, conservationists, and veterinarians had been getting ready. There was a controlled sense of urgency for their arrival as the horses were cautiously unloaded and escorted into the folder of their new secure enclosures. Evelyn came up to Nathan with, "We must get this to the authorities as quickly as possible," she added, holding the evidence firmly against her chest. "If we move," Nathan nodded, "we can quickly shut down the rest of this network before they have a chance to cover their tracks. Make the call. This is where the operation stops." Jenny joined them, her face mixed. With a gesture of relief and resolve, she inquired, "What about the German shepherd?" Nathan knelt down to the dog's level, who had been Nathan's constant company over the night. He smiled and added, "I think I've found my place," as he scratched behind its ears. "I'm coming home with me." Evelyn and Jenny exchanged a smile as the dog barked joyfully, seemingly understanding the significance of the night, briefly easing as they observed the strengthening of the human-dog link. But their respite was too short. When Dr. Chambers, the center's chief veterinarian, arrived, her face was solemn as she walked up to the group. "Nathan, Evelyn, we need to speak." They were led to a private office by Dr. Chambers, who set a file on a desk. "We've begun testing the animals you saved, and the majority of them are terrified and undernourished. However, they will get better with time." And Nathan scowled. "What's the bad news, Dr.?" Sighing, Chambers explained that the collars weren't merely tracking devices. Were made to keep a check on the animal's vitals and administer an injection. Evelyn's eyes widened. Dr. Chambers acknowledged that we don't fully know what it is, but we've stated samples to the lab for examination, but it would take days to receive the results. Nathan's surgery sent shivers down his spine. Sean was much more sinister than he had anticipated. "We must closely monitor those animals," he said. Dr. Chambers agreed. "We are already on it. Whatever they were injected with, we cannot allow it to spread or cause more harm. And as soon as we learn more, we'll let you know." As I left the office, Nathan's thoughts was racing and he couldn't stop. His disruption of the network may have been one of many, and it seemed like this was only the beginning. And later that day, Nathan, The materials in those collars suggested an experiment that went much beyond simple trafficking. Discovered himself in the temporary German Shepherd's enclosure, the dog welcomed him with a. Nathan crouched down and looked into its eager bark and wagging tail, as if it sensed that its life was about to change. "You've been through a lot," the dog's perceptive eyes whispered softly, "yet you're safe right now, and you will always be in my presence." The dog responded by licking his palm, completing the unwritten vow. Nathan stood between them with a renewed sense of purpose that filled his entire being. It was filled with evil, but he had personally witnessed the light that could overcome it. Courage, compassion, and the ensuing weeks were a flurry of action due to the unwavering relationship between people and animals. Evelyn and Jenny had joined LED in a series of raids on additional network-connected institutions, which led to more animals were rescued, and important players in the scheme were apprehended, making the German Shepherd a sign of hope. With its tail motivating innumerable people to combat animal abuse, Nathan's life was transformed in unexpected ways. The dog he named Shadow ended up becoming his devoted companion, supporting him in all facets of his life, including at work. That one evening, Nathan and his family became animal welfare champions, sharing their stories to push for change and raise awareness. And Shadow considered how far they had come as he sat on their porch and watched the sun sink over the horizon. The future was still unclear, but he was certain of one thing: would face it together. Shadow sighed contentedly as it laid its head on Nathan's lap. Nathan grinned as it released its mouth, his hand resting on the dog's sleek coat. "We have a lot of work ahead of you, buddy, but I believe we're prepared as the first." As stars emerged in the night sky, Nathan was overcome with appreciation for the difficulties he had encountered in his life. The journey had been unexpected, but he was saved and had a faithful companion by his side. He had been guided to the precise place he needed to be. Was this tale inspirational to you? Do you think that the unbreakable relationship between? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. And remember to like and subscribe to our channel. And come back soon for another amazing tale that honors the human spirit's tenacity and the animals that transform our lives.